This is BS on Broadcasting. David Brody, a former national radio host and talent coach with 4 decades in the industry.
You gotta understand what the score is and where you are in the game.
And Marc Serber, a commentator who's called and hosted soccer matches for leagues and competitions around the world.
Real panic defending from DC United, and continues here, and the beat is finally beaten. It's the opening goal for Chivas USA.
Together, they're on a mission to help every broadcaster be their best by learning from the best. And always talking BS. Brody, Serber on Broadcasting.
Welcome to BS on Broadcasting, where our mission is to help all sports broadcasters be their best by learning from the best. I'm Marc Serber alongside talent coach David Brody. No Sean Meadow tonight because, well, in this business, your calendar is constantly changing. But we are honored to be joined by Cindy Brunson, who does it all from hosting to play-by-play and color commentary. Cindy, it is a pleasure to have you with us tonight.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. What an intro. I hope I live up to that.
Oh, I think you already have lived up to it. We're just so excited to get the opportunity to get to chat with you. And let's get right into it, because you started off as an anchor and a weather reporter. So how did you make that transition into sports?
Well, first of all, I want to say kudos to you, Mark. I wish I would have had a resource like this when I was coming up, because this is fantastic. And I hope everybody who tunes in appreciates this opportunity to just learn and to have a step up on those people who are not maximizing every opportunity they have when it comes to a format like this. So credit to you, Mark and Brody. I started, now you have to ask me the question again, because now I forgot it.
Yeah. So I know that if I'm not mistaken, you're a Washington State Cougar, right?
Correct.
And I know that you started in the Great Pacific Northwest as an anchor and a weather reporter, but you weren't doing sports. And so, sometimes people will tell you, and I think you should do it all. And I think, no matter what you do, it's going to help you for what you want, and you should be on all parts of it. But some people say, oh, well, you might be worried that you get stuck with it. But how did you transition from a news anchor and a weather reporter into the sports field and doing the sports reporting and hosting?
I feel bad for forgetting such a great question. Thank you for that. Here's the deal. When you are breaking into the business, you take any job there is, because every rep is a step, whether it is exactly what you envision yourself doing or something completely opposite of what you think you want to do. Because if you take every opportunity, you expose yourself to something that you may love to do that you didn't know before. Everybody gets so tunnel visioned into, I'm going to be X. And you just have to let go of that, because X may not always be available, but Y may prepare you for X. So take every opportunity. When I graduated Washington State University, I knew I wanted to anchor sports on ESPN. That was the goal. That was the end all be all. But to get there, to get a job, to get reps, and to get on TV, I got hired off my internship at KHQ, the NBC affiliate, as a weather anchor, weekend weather anchor, and weekday reporter. So it was completely opposite of what I wanted to do. I did not really know weather. I had to take classes at Eastern Washington University in meteorology to get up to speed with things like cumulus clouds. What was it? Nimbus clouds, a whole bunch of clouds. Anyway, I wanted to walk the walk and talk the talk. So I educated myself, thank you, Cheney, Washington, to make sure that I didn't sound like a complete idiot at the weather board. And it was a great experience, because weather is a lot like sports, personality driven. So if you can get up and talk about a forecast for 2.5, 3 minutes long, you can for sure talk about sports for 2.5, 3 minutes long. So again, my biggest takeaway from that experience was it was wonderful to get on TV. It was wonderful to have an opportunity to get a tape to get to where I wanted to go. And it was wonderful to experience other things that made me a better broadcaster.
I think that that's great advice. I mean, I've said this before on the show, but one of the mistakes I made was I said, I'm a soccer guy and I'm only going to do soccer. And I was lucky to get the opportunity to do that. But then I realized how much reps I was missing out. And then I started to do other sports and I thought, oh my God, this is fun. I just enjoy broadcasting. It's not just the soccer part of it. It's the actual broadcasting part of it.
Yes.
And learning to love the art of the business, I think is such an important thing. How did
And if you do
make that-
something outside of sports, it makes you appreciate being in sports even that much more.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That fact that just every time you get to have that broadcast, it's a blessing in itself.
Mm-hmm.
How did you get, what was your first opportunity to get into hosting the sports?
Well, that came in my second job after graduation when I went from KHQ, the NBC affiliate in Spokane, Washington, to K2, the ABC affiliate in Portland, Oregon. I put together a really good resume reel from my work at the NBC affiliate in Spokane and was hired in Portland to be a weekend sports anchor. In the mornings, they were creating a new morning newscast. They wanted me to anchor the newscast. And I said, I'll do that if I can do the sports segment too. And so that's how I became a sports anchor, if you will. And then I was a weekday reporter in both sports and news. And so from there, I was able to cobble together another resume reel that I then sent to my agent, and my agent sent it off to ESPN. And within a year to the day that I had the contract out to explore opportunities at the network level, I got a call from ESPN.
That was kind of my next question. Just stealing all my questions here. I believe you were 24, right, when you started at ESPN? Is that right?
It seems like yesterday, but sure, yes. I was very lucky to be in my third job after graduating college and have that be at ESPN. I was the blind squirrel finding a nut for sure.
So I was going to ask you, how at 24 did you make it to ESPN? But you've pretty much answered the question. You had an agent, and the agent sent your tape to ESPN, and I'm sure your agent had a lot of contacts. How important is it for sports broadcasters to have an agent? And at what stage of the game should they think about hiring one?
Well, my agent found me. When I was in Spokane, Washington, rival TV stations headhunted me because they wanted me off of KHQ because they thought, gaining ratings because I was there. Every show that I was associated with that they moved me around on increased in ratings. Now, that just might be happenstance. I don't know. But the other station said, you know what? We got to get her out of this market. I had gotten out of the market myself through hard work and just nose to the grindstone and contacts and networking. But by the time I got to Portland, an agent had reached out to me and said, look, I don't have to help you with the Portland deal. I can look it over for sure, but I want to help you get to the next level. I have contacts at the network level. Now, I mean, and that was, late 90s, early 2000s, right? Now, everybody has the ability to put together something and put it on YouTube. So I don't think it's as important to have an agent until you get to that level. I have seen so many of my friends in the last decade, I guess pretty much since the time I left ESPN, get hired without representation. And they just have lawyers look over the contract to make sure it's all on the up and up. And they just keep it moving, and they don't have to share a part of their paycheck with a talent agent.
Sure.
The talent agents have become not unnecessary, but not as necessary as they were back in the day. And my line of demarcation now is if you're not making $100,000 or more, don't pay anybody. You have to be able to afford to take off that 5 to 10%. And if you can't, then don't do it.
I like that. Now, I don't know if you remember your first demo. Mine was about 70 years ago, so I don't recall. What do you suggest a young person put on a demo? Obviously, the first job is not going to be to ESPN, But when that person decides they're going to cobble their material together, how long should it be? What should be on that demo?
I think it shouldn't be longer than 5 minutes. I think the first thing you want to see is the name slate. It should be up for 3 or 4 seconds, with all, name, contact information, email, phone number, that type of thing. And then if you want to be an anchor, then I need to see 5 or 6 quick clips of your best anchoring, 10 to 20 seconds long, whether it's a lead in or top of a live shot or toss to a live shot, whatever it is, need to see your face. That if you want to be a front facing person, I need to see what you look like. I need to hear how you sound. And then nobody worth their salt gets to just anchor. You have to do other things. You have to be able to write and you have to be able to story tell. So the rest of your reel should be your very best packages. And I know local news stations have tightened those up. They're only 1.5 minutes, maybe 2 minutes long now. So you can put a couple of those on there, and then put your name slate again at the back end. So it's there to remind whoever is watching, the news director, whatever, this is who I am and this is how to contact me.
Cindy, let me ask you this quick question, and then Mark, you take it after this, if you would. Young person sends out their first demo. What's the best way to do it in terms of reaching the news director? Do you suggest email or place a phone call to that person?
I would email with the link, and then I would follow up with a phone call. Hey, Cindy Brunson, just following up with you to make sure that you received this.
Right. Okay. Good advice. Mark?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really something that we haven't really talked about here is about how to go about constructing a highlight reel or a resume reel. And so if you could just tell us a little bit about when you've gone through the reel, whether it was for ESPN, whether it was when you've updated it, or what do you put into your reels? What are you considering? What are you thinking about and looking at as you construct these demos?
Well, now I've made them sports specific,
Mm-hmm.
and I have made them job specific, if you will. I have 3 or 4 different ones now. No, 4 or 5. Now, if I think about it, because I'm going after different opportunities. So I have one that, hey, I am a great host. If you need me to host, here's all my hosting. I have one that's basketball play-by-play, both men's and women's. Here I am, here's the game intro, here's a halftime hit, here's some calls, that type of thing. I have a softball only reel with intro to, hey, we're at University of Arizona. This is number 4 UCLA against number 10 Arizona. We got it for you, that type of thing. And then I have a collage of sideline reporting, hosting, and play-by-play in case I need a D, all of the above default reels. So I have several different ones.
And so when you get to ESPN from Portland, Oregon, what were some of the biggest lessons that you learned while working for the 4 letters? And specifically when you first get there, and you get there pretty quickly, especially for somebody in this business. What were kind of the things that you kind of like learned right away and thought, okay, this is where I really have to polish things off, or okay, this is where I'm feeling really strong. And then how did you go about just kind of fixing those things when you're doing it in the national spotlight?
I was really fortunate. When I got to ESPN, there was ESPN News. So it was kind of like the farm team, if you will, for the big ball club at ESPN. So I wasn't thrown into SportsCenter until I earned the right to be there. I started in September of 1999, and I didn't debut on SportsCenter until February of 2001. I scratched and clawed. What I realized when I got to ESPN was I don't know anything about sports. I am surrounded by people who know 1,000 times more than I do. And I was really well read. My dad didn't have any boys. I grew up in front of the television watching sports. Keith Jackson was my hero, the soundtrack of my youth. And that's why I went to Washington State University in the first place. I knew my stuff, but compared to people who live, eat, and breathe it 24/7, 365, I didn't know anything. Coming from the Pacific Northwest, we love sports. We really love sports, but we don't live and die by sports, not like they do on the East Coast. So I'm alphabetically situated next to John Butchergross, who was telling me about Pittsburgh Steelers that were playing before I was even born. I'm like, oh my gosh, I have got to study. And that's what I did. Back in the day, we had, team almanacs and media guides, and everything was in print, and I read everything. And that's how I got up to speed. By the grace of God, I had great bosses as well. On ESPN News, my senior coordinating producer, Mike McQuaid, he's like, you don't know hockey. I was like, Mike, I didn't grow up with hockey. We didn't have hockey in the Pacific Northwest. We didn't have an NHL team. He's like, all right, what can I do to help you? And I said, I am a listen learner. And that is how things stick in my brain. So if you can have somebody take the pronunciation guide for the NHL and say it into a tape recorder, I am going to know those names. And God bless Mike, he did that. And now that is just done at ESPN. There is an audio file. So everybody can thank Cindy Brunson for being a big dork and unable to get to hockey when she started. There's audio files now for every single sport that is played that anchors can go in and listen to and make sure they are getting it right. Because if you are not getting it right, that's your credibility. You have no credibility if you can't pronounce the name right. And so that was one of the things that really helped me. So I had a really good boss at that time who wanted me to succeed and wanted to help me succeed. And then it was just reps. It was all the nights, working alongside David Lloyd and Bill Pito and John Anderson and John Butchergross and Steve Berthiaume and, those guys on ESPN News that really helped me get good and good enough to be on a SportsCenter regular.
And so you get to the SportsCenter regular and you hosted pretty much all the shows on ESPN, but you also then were able to make the transition to play-by-play and color commentary, which you've continued throughout your career. How did you make that transition? How did that come about?
I followed my husband's lead. My husband, Steve Berthiaume, is the television play-by-play man for the Arizona Diamondbacks. When we had a couple years to go on current contracts at ESPN, this is 2010, my husband had thought about play-by-play because he just loved baseball. He was kind of over SportsCenter. He was on Baseball Tonight all the time. He just loves baseball. And I said, you should do play-by-play. He goes, I might. And then it just kind of sat there. And then in 2011, there was a hotly contested playoff race, and there were 4 teams competing for the right to get into the postseason, and they were all playing at the end of the season on a Jewish holiday. And Carl Ravitch was unavailable for play-by-play. So they tapped Steve on the shoulder and say, hey, you want to do play-by-play? And he said, okay. And he flew down to Tampa to work with John Crutt on Rays Yankees. And it was an epic game. Yankees went up by 7, and then the Rays came back, tied it, ended up walking it off in extras. And I was hosting the 11 o'clock SportsCenter with Butchergross, and the director was nice enough to pipe in the game into my earpiece while we were doing the show. And I could just hear the joy in Steve's voice. And I was like, oh my gosh, he's going to do this now. This is it. We got to figure out what our life is going to look like because he's going to do this. And of course, I don't even think he took the flight home from Tampa. He just kind of floated from Tampa back to Bristol and said, yeah, this is cool. Being at the event is better than talking about what happened at the event. And that stuck with me. I thought, because I had been approached a couple of times by ESPN to do women's college basketball play-by-play. And I said no, because I didn't want to travel. I had just gotten married. I never saw my husband as it was when we worked in the same building. I thought, I'm not going to travel on top of this. No, thanks. So my husband felt differently. He's like, no, I want to do this. I will travel. I'll do whatever they want. So he did every assignment possible. He did college baseball. He did the futures game for the All-Star game. and he did some spring training baseball. He had just enough to cobble together a reel. And the following summer, there was a change in the Arizona Diamondbacks broadcast booth. And because Rick Sutcliffe had worked with my husband in studio at ESPN, Rick told the bosses at the Diamondbacks, hey, you need to talk to my guy, Steve Berthume. Steve flies out in the summer of 2012 and gets that job. And I had just signed another contract with ESPN because I thought, my husband's not going to get hired on his first job in Major League Baseball. There's only 30 of those. I better re-sign my contract so we can eat. And then we were off to Arizona. So always be ready for the unexpected. Forget about plan B, and just go with it. I learned that very quickly there at the end of 2012 and into 13.
I want to ask you about some of the challenges that you've had to deal with, both as an anchor and as a play-by-play person, being a woman. Why don't we start with ESPN? You arrived there in 1999, as we said, 24 years old. You're a woman. Tell us about what it was like walking into ESPN and not being part of the boys club.
I never had to wait in line to use the ladies' room. For the longest time, it was just Linda Cohn and I. It was interesting because we were still trying to work through a lot of sexism and misogyny. I'm sure if you walked into ESPN now, it's a very different workplace, a much better workplace, a much more inviting and welcoming workplace. Not that it wasn't when I was there, but I was still a unicorn. There just weren't that many women there. There weren't that many women on camera. There weren't that many women behind the scenes in research, directing, producing. You only needed one hand to count how many women were there in all of those departments. And the sad part for me is that all of these years later, there is still not a woman in the major deciding room. It is still a group of 8 men that make the call on who gets to do what. And substantive change won't happen until women get into that room. But I digress. It was, I mentioned my boss, one of my bosses, Mike McQuaid. He was fantastic and very helpful. I think it was an environment where it was kind of us against the world. Nobody understood what a weird life ESPN can be because you're in Bristol. There's nothing around except for Otis Elevator Company. And
there's that little
not
theme
that
park
much
next to it.
Yeah, but nobody goes. It's just so random. And the people that you work with become your family. Like I'll never forget looking around at our wedding when Steve and I got married in 2006. Almost all of our invitees were people from ESPN. It was like an ESPN party, and it was wonderful, but it just let you know that that community is so small and so tight, and we're bonded by the fact that that place dominates your life. And it doesn't, I don't think, mean to, but it just ends up happening. You just are having a good time and you want to do well and you don't mind the grind. And then you look up and you go, wow, I worked 70 hours last week. Wow. Did I wash my hair? What, I mean, those kind of things just kind of resonate. But I got really fortunate that I had some good bosses. I had really great teammates. David Lloyd, who I hosted Morning Sports Center with for 3 years, and Bob Lee. Oh my gosh, you talk about a master's class and how to do the job the right way. Bob Lee was unbelievable. So helpful, so kind, so generous with everything, his contact list, his whatever I needed or asked for or thought about, he was there. Absolutely fantastic. And I had the absolute pleasure of working alongside him. I know you guys will remember this, November, around Thanksgiving holiday, when Elin Woods decided to take a 7-iron and go after Tiger. And all of a sudden there's a car on a curb and there's shattered glass and Tiger's in the hospital and it's breaking news everywhere. And Bob Lee is just driving the train down the tracks and it was unbelievable.
Well, I too have a Bob Lee story. I was at ESPN as an intern in 1983. I think I was the second.
Oh, so you've got the good stories.
Well, yeah. And Bob and I are about the same age, but
okay.
He was an anchor and I'm a little intern. And they gave me a script to run down to Sports Center and give to Bob Lee. And so, and they told me, you better run. Back in those days, I could run. You better run because Sports Center is starting in like 30 seconds. So run. I'm like Forrest Gump, running. Go down there. And I take the script and I hand it to Bob. And Bob looks at me and he's like, well, yeah, about time we got it. And I said, well, I assumed that you had it. And he looks at me and he said, don't ever assume, young man.
Nice.
Young man, we were born the same year.
That's Bob.
That was Bob.
Did he tell you to go see Bruce Springsteen too?
No. He did not. By the way, you mentioned one of my other, one of my favorite people at ESPN, Linda Cohn, and
yes.
Interview her a couple of times. So, Mark, we're going to have to get Linda on this this podcast of ours. She is really terrific. So let me jump to the second part of my question. Again,
sure.
I always teach my students, don't ask a two-part question. Unfortunately, I think I just did. But the second part, again, as a female in the play-by-play world, how difficult was that? What were some of the challenges when you first started to do that?
I was really lucky because I work for the Pac-12 Network. And because they just don't have that much reach, I kind of get to work in a vacuum. So I was able to, try some things out and see what worked for me and what didn't without a bunch of ridicule or too much scrutiny. So that was really nice. And my husband is a saint. He has watched more women's basketball than a non-fan of the sport should ever have to watch, just helping me make that transition. Because from studio, you rely on a teleprompter. It's there for your convenience. And in live sports, none of that applies. You can have a few notes written down, but if you don't know it, if you don't have player recognition with the number on the jersey when you're calling basketball, you're toast. So it's a different skill set and it's fun, but it takes practice. Like I said, every rep is a step. And you just don't wake up one day and go, oh, I really got this. Like I ask my husband all the time, when did you get comfortable as a Diamondbacks play-by-play? He said, it took about 500 games. 500 games.
Wow.
And I believe that he's right, because I've been doing this, I'll be going on 9 years. And I just, you talk about being a woman. I just this season, after doing it for 8 years, finally got an opportunity to call men's games. I did it for Pac-12 Network. I did it for FS1 and for ESPN Radio. And none of those doors were open to me before 2020. I think the seismic shift that we experienced culturally throughout the global pandemic in the year of our Lord 2020, and the subsequent things that we've seen happen at ESPN in 2021 with personnel, I think helped facilitate those things. But it was hard, because I could stand here. I would put my resume up against anybody, and I'm still struggling to prove that I know what I'm doing and that I'm worth somebody taking a shot on. So that tells you that even though things look really good from the outside, it's still tough on the inside. As a woman, we're just not getting that many opportunities. And it's still a disproportionate balance on women's sports coverage. 90% of everything that you see on ESPN is, or anywhere else, CBS, Fox, what have you, is male sports, catering to the 18 to 35-year-old demo in the male dominated sphere. And because of that, women just don't have that many opportunities. And it's always a big deal when somebody does get an opportunity. There's, press releases and, oh, Beth Mowins is going to call the NBA, like the world should stop rotating. No, this should be a normal thing. And that's what I love when I hear Lisa Byington talk, the play-by-play person for the Bucks. She's like, it's just got to be normal. Women calling games has to become normal. It can't be headline news. And when we get to the point where it's just, oh yeah, she's on the game, then we'll have made strides. But we're getting there. We have 2 women play-by-play, actually 2 and a quarter. We've got Kate Scott with the 76ers, Byington with the Bucks. Zora Stevenson is the backup to Byington in Milwaukee. So that's why I say 2 and a quarter, because when Byington is gone, like she is for the March Madness situation now, Zora Stevenson is stepping in and being the primary play-by-play for the Milwaukee Bucks, the defending NBA champs. That's progress. That's awesome. But those are only 3 women amongst all of the NBA teams on a regular basis. And so that is where change needs to happen.
And so what advice would you give to young women who want to be in the play-by-play industry as to how to navigate it and deal with that frustration?
Keep pushing. You can't get frustrated. You just have to be ready. It's so funny because I interviewed for the Sixers job because I've reached the point in my career where not only am I doing stuff for myself and testing my abilities, but I'm doing it for the generation that's coming behind me. I want to be the example for that young woman that's sitting at home going, I don't know if I can do this. There's nobody that looks like me doing this. I want to be that person. Especially being a biracial woman, I'm Black, my dad is Black, my mom is white. So until the world shut down in 2020, I always knew that I was a champion for women in sports. I had no idea that people of color that looked to me as well until I actually got to engage with them because the world had stopped spinning. Thank you, coronavirus. But it was great because then I thought, all right, now I've got this double responsibility. And for the rest of my career, I made a pledge to myself that I'm going to honor everybody who is on this ride with me. I envision myself in the front of the car, driving down the freeway of life. And in the backseat are a bunch of Black and brown women. And so as I drive, every job that I accept is very intentional. I want, when I did men's basketball for the first time on ESPN radio, I was terrified because I'd never done radio before, but I did it because I wanted to prove it could be done. And I wanted to prove to myself that I could do it. And maybe not be a total train wreck on the air. And I don't think I was. My husband said I did a good job, so I'm going to hold him to his word. But
is he biased by any?
He's not biased. He's hard. He is my worst critic. You imagine your worst professor in college that took a red pen to everything that you did. That is my husband. He literally he watches every second of every game or listens and is constantly texting me notes. He is unbelievably supportive in that vein and has made me leaps and bounds better, faster probably than somebody just working on their own without that sort of support and mentorship. He was texting me. I was on somehow ESPN radio put me on number 3 Baylor at number 21 Texas just 2 weeks ago before the Big 12 tournament. And it was great. I'm with Bob Valvano. I met Vern Lundquist at the game. I mean, it was just unbelievable. And it was a great learning experience. It was really, I thought, wow, I've got it easy in TV because we don't have to be this descriptive because the screen, the images do so much of the work for you. But it was great. And now I checked that box and I know what to do and tell other people who want to do that, I've got those tools in my toolbox now. So yeah, I think being a woman in play-by-play is still hard because there just still aren't that many opportunities. But hopefully that'll change. And my biggest piece of advice, keep pushing. You just have to keep pushing. Hear the word no, you don't have to listen, because there's going to be another opportunity. And be prepared to do any sport that's available. Beth Mowens ingrained this on me a long time ago when I first started making the pivot. She came up through the ranks doing minor league baseball. She said minor league baseball was so fantastic to her because there was so much time during a broadcast to work out the kinks. And there are so many reps because there are so many games. And so that's a big piece of advice too. Do something that you think you may not want to do ultimately, but do it because of the reps and opportunities associated with it.
You said something there that I was thinking about it. First of all, just the fact that there are so many games, and in different sports too. I mean, you said right before, Pac-12, and all of a sudden you're doing a game on ESPN radio, and you have all these, different games and different sports, and they're coming at you fast and heavy. When you're kind of under the crunch like that, what do you prioritize in your preparation? Because obviously we would all love 10 to 12 hours to prepare for each game, but sometimes you just don't get that. So what do you prioritize in your preparation so that even if you're, in a bit of a time crunch, you can still go on feeling confident that you've done what you need to do to not just get through a broadcast, but to have a successful one?
The crux for me is always name and player recognition. The jersey number, the name, for me in college, the year in school, which has gotten kind of interesting with the COVID super seniors and all of that. And just what they average for basketball, what are their points and rebounds or points and assists, whatever they do. In softball, batting average, defensive stats, pitching, if they're the pitcher in the circle, those kind of key nuggets, where they're from, I build my boards for basketball on who scores. Everybody who scores the most starts at the top and goes all the way down to the last player on the roster, because I have determined that works for me because those are the folks I'm talking about the most. So I will do the most research on the people that are top 8 or 9 scorers in basketball. And I will have 3 or 4 nuggets on each of those players. And then I will have 3 or 4 in-depth stories on each of those players. And those are easy to find on any college website. So it doesn't take a ton of research to do that. And I have found, thanks to my friend Roxy Bernstein, this deal called Broadcaster's Edge. It's a service that compiles all of the statistics for you. So you're not chasing down, oh, what's that guy's free throw percentage? It's all there for you. And that has been a godsend. That was the thing that freed me up to go, well, yes, I can do men's games and women's games in the same week because I'm not doing all this by hand. And so, and it lets you build the boards the way you want. You can stack the players, you can pick the colors. It's just really fabulous. I just absolutely love it. So yeah, a tool like Broadcaster's Edge came in handy. And then my husband got me on this Evernote system, and you have the ability to store all this information on every player, and you can just stack it by teams, and there are little notebooks. You go into the notebook, update the player page, and you can basically just cut and paste the player page from the media guide and put it right into your Evernote. So you have an extensive amount of information at your fingertips right there on your iPad or your laptop on an individual player too. And my husband got that from Chris Collinsworth when he saw him on the road one time. And we've been big fans of that application pretty much ever since. I think I've used it for 8 years now, and I love it. So I like to build everything in Evernote as a backup to my broadcaster's edge, just so I have all of the information at my fingertips. But broadcaster's edge has been a godsend. But yeah, definitely have 3 or 4 things about a player, because you've done games, you get into it and you feel like you have 2 hours worth of stuff to say on 4 players, and you might get 3 nuggets in. So it's always better to be prepared to say 10 things and save the 2, and just let the action dictate what you say.
I want to go back to our discussion about young women who perhaps are in college and they want to become the next you. They would love to be a play-by-play broadcaster. However, at their school, they're not given the opportunity to do play-by-play. We would hope that that's not the case when you look at the college landscape in this country, but I'm sure there are still many schools where the women are not getting those opportunities. For those women, what advice do you have? And again, these are women who want to be you. They want to do play-by-play, but again, are not getting the opportunities in college. What advice do you have for them?
Well, I would be like a Division I athlete. If I wasn't getting playing time, I would look at that transfer portal, because there are schools that are doing great stuff. I mean, just here in my backyard, ASU Cronkite is letting everybody do play-by-play in a variety of different sports. So that would be piece of advice number 1. Piece of advice number 2, if that's not a viable option, look around at Division 2 or 3 schools in your area and see if you can get in that way.
Great
because
advice.
they are always looking for people to do things. Now, you're not going to become a millionaire doing that, but you are going to get valuable experience. So, and make great connections, because those coaches always find their way to D1, and then maybe through the athletic department, you become the person in charge of media at a D1 school. Not terrible. So yeah, that's what I would do.
Great answer. Tell us some of the lessons that you've learned along the way in your broadcasting career that a young person, the information that you're about to give, the young person just needs to know at this stage of their life.
Preparation is everything, and preparation done by yourself is critical, because you're the one that is going to be held to the fire if it goes sideways. So you are your own best friend when it comes to preparation. If you're not ready, there's no worse feeling. I just can't imagine. And I've seen people get opportunities, and I can tell just by listening that they're not ready. And I'm thinking, what a waste. What an absolute waste. And especially as a woman, you hope that the opportunities keep coming, but you just don't know. And you don't want to be the weak link in the chain. I always felt that way when I was at SportsCenter, that I wasn't just hosting at Cindy Brunson, that I was Chris McKendry, I was Linda Cohn, I was Hannah Storm. I didn't want to let the colleagues of mine who also purchased bras down. That was first and foremost, that I had to come correct. And that was my personal bar. I was not going to fall below that. So yeah, be prepared, know your stuff. You know, when I got to ESPN, I was given the grace to learn hockey. Nobody is going to be given that now, not in today's world where every team has their own website and every team, you know, has their own media team, for Pete's sake, and expects, you know, the expectation of knowledge is there, and there's no excuse not to know it. So whatever you want to pursue, you got to know your stuff. And another piece of it, oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, my apologies. I was just going to say, and going back to something you said earlier, you know, the majority of teams, if not every team, actually has a sound file where you can go and listen to the pronunciation of each player's name.
Yes. We should just call that the Brunson File. Let's just go ahead and say that.
How are you not getting royalty on that?
I know, right?
That's crazy.
at the very least at ESPN.
Yeah.
But yeah, so know your stuff. Now, I will also say, especially for women, because women have a tendency, and I have been guilty of this myself, to not go for things because they don't think they are qualified, that they haven't checked enough boxes. And you guys know, as men, you don't hold yourself to that standard. You just go for stuff. And I encourage every young woman I encounter now to just be like a guy. Just go for it. Don't worry about checking boxes. If I was a box checker, I would have never accepted the ESPN radio offer. So I think great things can come from, maybe you don't have enough experience, but just go for it anyway, because you can learn from not hitting a home run. You can learn from hitting a single or a double, or even striking out. But if you don't go to the plate, you will never learn.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful advice, because yeah, like you said, a lot of people just, oh, well, I'm not ready, but in this business, you have to take what you get when you get the opportunity, because you don't know when it's going to come around again. And so it's kind of a now or never thing, whether you think you're ready for it or not. You just kind of got to
100%.
jump into the fire and figure out how to navigate it.
Yeah, like now that I've done ESPN radio once, I hope they ask me back again, because I will be amazing, because now I've seen it. I know what the expectations are. I've done it. I've sat next to Bob Valvano. I learned from the producer who was on the other side of me, and it won't be intimidating, and I can wrap my arms around it. Before, I just got through it, and now I can crush it because I've done it. So yes, like I said, every rep is a step.
Where do you feel that you are in your own evolution as a play-by-play woman? What are you working on at this moment? What are you trying to get better at as you continue with each game?
I'm just trying to be the Cindy Brunson that sits on the couch and watches games, minus the swear words, at the game. Just to be, sometimes I slip into sportscaster presenter mode, and it's just not warm and inviting. So my big thing has just be burn lung, just be warm, just be inviting all the time from the top of the broadcast. Sometimes I work my way into it by the first time out in the first quarter or the first half. I'm just trying to be that person. And I think I got there this season, particularly with AU Pro Women's Basketball that I did in Las Vegas for 5 weeks. I was working alongside the Hall of Famer Cheryl Swoops. We had great chemistry, and it was just easy. And I want every broadcast that I do to be like that. That's my goal. That's the carrot that I have out in front of myself now.
Brody, I feel like that's music to your ears.
Yeah, no, I mean, Cindy, not trying to suck up to you, but your responses are amazing tonight. I get this question all the time. How do you develop a play-by-play style? So I'll throw that one at you.
I think the style depends on what you're doing, because I know my style is different on a men's game than it is on a women's game, only because the women's play-by-play and analyst role is a lot more, there's sharing that goes on. There's more space for the analyst. And you only see that space for the analyst, like when Bill Walton is on, that he talks almost as much as the play-by-play. The play-by-play, right? The play-by-play dominates basketball, men's side, more than on the women's side. So I've had to make that adjustment, because I would much rather hear from the analyst than myself. I'm there, for the nuts and bolts and who scored what. And they're there to tell you the why. And I think the why is what's fascinating. So I like to give my analysts a lot of space. And I think a couple of the analysts that I work with on the men's side, Valvano loved it. And Matt Muehlbach was great on Arizona game with me. He did my first men's game, and he's like, wow, I've got all this space. I was like, I want you to have that space. That's how I want the broadcast to be. If we're having a good time and you feel like you have enough time to talk, then you're going to say great things and we're going to have fun. So I think that's how I've developed my style of just having it be a little more conversational and not so robotic. And I think that has also lent itself to me being more relaxed and open and fun and inviting.
You pretty much answered my next question, which was going to be, how do you find your natural voice? The question itself seems kind of ridiculous, right? How do you find your natural voice? If it's natural, you should know it, right? It should be there,
Yeah.
but not that simple, is it?
No, it's not. And especially coming from the female perspective, because you don't want to sound like a screaming Mimi. You know, you don't want to go to that super high octave banshee yell when you get excited. So I think the tendency, especially for women, is to talk lower and slower, which at certain points sounds like, do you have a pulse? Do you care what's happening in front of you? And to avoid that was one of the first big stumbling blocks that I had, because I just was so concerned about the tone and tenor, because again, you're inviting the masses to listen to something different and you don't want it to be unpleasant. But at the same time, a lot of people's normal voice isn't as low as it probably needs to be palatable for zillions of people. And so I think women in particular try to go really low and slow, and you can't do that. You just have to talk. And I always say, whether you're, in studio talking to a camera with a red light or talking at a game, just talk as if you are at the bar telling your friend what happened. That's it. To be comfortable with what you're saying, just act as if you are breaking it down for a buddy over a pitcher of beer.
I once asked Tim Brando what he thinks when he looks into a camera, what's going through his mind. And I'll never forget, he said, I'm looking at my dad. That's what I'm looking at. Yeah. Very touching. He said, when I see that camera, it's my dad's eye. And that's what I'm looking at. And that's what I'm thinking as I'm staring into the camera.
That's awesome. That's why I kept my main name Brunson, because when my dad hears it, I still get a call. He loves it, the whole deal. So yeah, I'm not quite as wonderfully spoken as Brando, but yeah, I get where he's coming from with that. And it's so true. I mean, to keep it simple and to make it warm and welcoming, whatever gets you there. And for me, that camera is just a friend, my sister, my husband, just somebody easy to talk to.
By the way, we can all learn from Tim Brando. He told me that no one has called as many different sports at ESPN as he had when he was there. And sure. I said to him, Tim, and he was rattling off all the sports. And I said, how did you know all those sports? He said, I didn't know any of this stuff. They would call me and say, can you do fencing? Yes. Do you know it? Absolutely. Get off the phone. Fencing. F-E-N. Gotta look that
right.
one.
Right.
So just
100%.
Take it and worry about it later, right?
Right. But that again, and let's spin that toward a woman, they might have offered Linda Cohn that and she probably said no. Now she's saying yes to everything now. She's got hockey, inside the crease, all of that. But that's the guy mentality. That's the Brando mentality. He said yes and figured it out. And I just implore women to do the same thing.
Yeah. All right, Mark, you want to wrap it up?
Yeah. I think that, we've heard so many amazing things and so much great advice that I hate to ask this question, but we have to ask it because I think it gives advice to future broadcasters out there and those who are working is, we don't want people to make kind of the same mistakes that we do. But the bottom line is that when you're broadcasting, you're in a live event, mistakes are going to happen. And it's not about the mistakes themselves necessarily. Obviously, try not to make the mistakes that you've learned from others that they've made, but it's how do you react from it? How do you come back from it? And so one of the things that I like to ask everyone is, what is, one or two mistakes that you've made that, maybe felt, kind of earth shattering at the moment, or felt like, oh, I'm about to be in a really dark place. But what was the mistake, and how did you overcome that, and to be able to get back to your best and get back to that level of credibility that you want with your audience?
I am really fortunate that I don't think I've had a big slip on the air. So I was very fortunate to do the bulk of my career before people had the ability to pull video clips. So as a studio host at ESPN, so I'm very fortunate there. I do know a big mistake that I made was not saying yes to ESPN when they first approached me to do play-by-play. I regret that every single day. I think my path post studio hosting could have been a lot easier because I would have already been in place and had a role instead of trying to find it and figure it out once I left ESPN and that big 4-letter umbrella of comfort. I think I'm probably a better broadcaster for not having done that, but that is something that I look back on my career and regret every day. And I just look at how my husband handled it. They offered it and he said yes and didn't even think about it and just kept on his merry way, and then got a Major League Baseball job. And I think, wow, would I have a WNBA job if I'd have said yes back then? So that's something that's always in the back of my mind. And I've tried to change now that I've gotten a little older of, yes, I will do that. Like I said to ESPN radio, yes, I will do that. So
I think that's really great advice. And that dovetails kind of into the two questions that we ask each of our guests as we wrap up on the BS on broadcasting. But the first one is, knowing everything that you know now, what would you go back and tell yourself, the Cindy Brunson who's just starting out in the Pacific Northwest? What kind of advice would you give yourself, that knowing what you know now?
be fiscally responsible faster. Do not wait till you think you are making money to save money.
That's awesome. I think that's really great because, in this industry, especially when you're starting out, if you're an independent contractor, you might do a big game one night and feel like, you're flush, but then you might wake up the next morning and go, what am I going to do for the next 2 weeks? I don't have a gig for the next 2 weeks. Or you might do a game for a lot of money one night and then go and do a game the next day for $50. And so I think that's, great advice, and something that kind of really needs to be addressed, especially to those just starting out in terms of how do you manage that and how do you go about that? So yeah, that's just awesome.
And I would also say, do what makes you happy. Don't do something that you don't find joy in. Life is too short. I have run into folks where it just hasn't worked out, and that's okay. You can find something else to do. I talked to several professors who teach over at ASU Cronkite, and they do occasional things here and there, and they're really happy. This job profession can be a grind, and it can suck the life out of you. And if you're not getting joy from it, you don't have to do it. If you can find other outlets that bring you joy, I would pursue those. I'm lucky in the fact that I don't do play-by-play to put food on the table. I do this for my personal joy. And so I can pick and choose what I do. I only work like a half a year. I do all the basketball and softball. And then I try to be available throughout my husband's baseball schedule, because 162 and 187 days is no joke. And if I'm working a lot, then I probably wouldn't see him. So our situation is really unique, and I have that luxury. But I've had friends that have just left the business. They're just like, I can't, there's just no joy in this. I'm not happy. It's a drain. So just be okay with that. Be okay with your choice of recognizing that maybe it's not working, and find something else, and be available to help somebody else navigate those waters as well.
And I feel like you've answered this to some extent, but if somebody came up to you, green behind the ears, maybe, 16, 17 years old, and they say, hey, I want to do this. What is a piece of advice that you would give them that you feel not enough people starting out in this industry are being told?
I think preparation is so huge. You have to know your stuff. And you have to have realistic expectations. Even though I had a very quick vault from graduating Washington State University in May of 96 to getting to ESPN in September of 99, that's atypical. You have to be ready to grind and to not make very much money, and to learn how to find a great wardrobe at a bargain on eBay. Those kind of things you have to be ready to do, and not sweat instant fame or gratification or whatever you're doing. And if you're going into this business to be famous, please don't. That's not what sports journalism and sports broadcasting is about. If you want to be a Kardashian, they got a new show starting on Hulu. Join them. Don't do this. That's not what sports broadcasting is about. Brody, are you laughing?
You're so right. You're just so right on that. Yeah.
As you can tell.
And don't, and I always tell my students, don't do this for the money. Just don't. Do it because you love it. And if you love it, you have passion, you'll get good at it. And if you get good at it, the money is going to come. Quick story. I had a student. He was at Syracuse, client of mine, and I coached him for 4 years. And he graduates, and Syracuse is just not a cheap school. And I think I was charging him a pretty penny over those 4 years. And he comes out of school, and he said to me, all right, what do I do now? And I called a couple of friends of mine in the business, and I got him an interview. And he called me and he said, are you effing kidding me? He said, they're talking about paying me $28,000 a year. And I said,
yes.
And the problem, I said, and the problem is what? He said, I can't live on $28,000 a year. I said, yeah, you can. So to make a long story short, he didn't go into broadcasting. He got a marketing job, the same job he could have had 4 years before he applied in whatever year that was. Didn't go to Syracuse, didn't have to spend $240,000 on that education. But he, at that point, when he was 22 years of age, was thinking about going into radio for the wrong reason. You're not going to make $50,000 your first week out of college as a radio announcer. You're just not. And you just have to assume for the first, 3, 4, 5 years, it's going to be a lot of rice and peanut butter and jelly.
Top ramen for me. It was top ramen all of the time. Yeah. Absolutely. And my other piece of advice would be kind. Be good to everybody around you. Be the person that everybody thinks you are, if that makes sense. If they think that you're a really good person, be that person. Don't be a jerk. Don't be a bad teammate. Don't be a bad coworker. I'll never forget when I first started in Spokane, I would walk by this certain hallway because it was a cheap way to get in, and it was next to the janitorial area. And a gentleman named Ed was our nighttime janitor. And I always stopped and talked to Ed and asked him how he was doing and how his day was going. And I just did it just because that's how I was raised. That's what I did. And we had the storm of the century in late 96 into 97, ice, snow, feet of snow. And I had been working like 30 hours straight on all these live shots talking about the weather and the ice and the whole thing. And I knew my car was just frozen over and I didn't even want to deal with it when I was finally able to go home. And I sulk kind of out the door and I say, Ed, I gotta go deal with this car. Wish me luck. And lo and behold, Ed had de-iced and removed all the snow from my car so that I could get home safely. And I didn't ask him to do that, but it was just the simple, hi, Ed, how are you, that led to one of the most epically awesome things that happened to me at KHQ6, because I could just get into my car after all of those hours of live television and go home. So be kind.
See, and I thought with that story, you were going to say, and that Ed guy, the janitor who you had to deal with for however long it was, later became your boss at ESPN.
I would love that. No, instead, Brody, I had a news director that told me I would never get a sports job when I was handing in my 2 weeks at KHQ, even though I had said sports job in my back pocket.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everyone has an opinion, as they say, right?
100%.
Doesn't mean you have to listen.
No.
Yeah.
If anything, just use that as fuel to get better. And the best revenge is the success.
Oh, 100%.
Somebody called me and
Yeah.
said that. And
yes,
you
her
know,
husband was a huge sports fan. So as soon as I got to ESPN, he was watching ESPN News all the time because he couldn't get enough of 24-hour sports. So I was in her living room a lot, and it was awesome.
Living well is the best revenge. I also kind of want to thank you as well, because I think, you said don't do it for the money. And I think one of the reasons so many of us are in play-by-play is there's this feeling that you're chasing when you just have an amazing broadcaster. You get to be a witness to a special moment in sports.
Yes.
And the way
oh
you
my gosh, I had
described, 3
buzzer beaters this season. 3.
that's amazing.
I mean, it's just and one was an overtime from half court, those kind of things where you just happen upon the moment. And I didn't get into play-by-play for those moments, but like you said, the juice of being at the live events and being a part of the story of the game is so incredibly fulfilling.
Absolutely. I think you just nailed it when you said your husband didn't fly home, he floated home. I think when you have that feeling, it just feels like you've hit kind of the pinnacle, and then you're always chasing to kind of get back up and reach that peak again, reach that summit again. But I think you just kind of nailed something that, I always thought about. It's like, well, what is it I'm chasing? It's kind of like this feeling, but I think you kind of perfectly illustrated that.
Yay.
Cindy, before we let you go, I think Brody wanted to say something too.
Sure.
My apologies, but before we let you go, where can we find you on social, and where will we get to watch you and have the pleasure of listening to you next?
On social, I'm Cindy Brunson AZ on both Twitter and Instagram. And my next assignment will be softball on Pac-12 Network, Arizona, hosting UCLA. And that's in a couple of weeks.
Awesome. Brody, any final words?
Yeah, I've been following Cindy. I'm not a stalker, but I've been following you on television for a very long time. Had never met you, spoken to you, and you are extremely impressive. And thank you for giving us this hour. This has been terrific.
Oh, Brody, you're so kind. And the check will clear, I promise.
Just spell the name right.
Good, because like you said, he is the master of finding the best wardrobe at a low price on eBay, as you can see. So yeah. But,
no, it's critical. I always try to pay it forward. And, when I do a closet clean out, like I'm getting ready to do, I try to find things like Rising Stars Media, where young women are getting into broadcasting, to just kind of make sure that my wardrobe extras are available. And I implore everybody to look for resources like that, because it's look good, feel good, and you got to look like you belong there. So
That's a great lesson. If I can just tell one last quick story, I was doing a Princeton Harvard game in Cambridge many moons ago, and a buddy of mine who was a New York program director met me up there, and I'm wearing jeans and I'm wearing a shirt that's worse than this. And I actually spent about $15 on this, but I'll never forget this. He came up to me at halftime and he said, "You got a minute?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Don't dress the way you're dressed." And I said, "Well, it's radio, what, it doesn't make a difference." He goes, "Yeah, it does. It does." He said, "Dress for the gig that you want, not necessarily the one that you have." And he said, "And you need to dress better." And God's honest truth, that was the last time that I looked like a slob calling a basketball or football game. And I think that was very, very good advice. Yeah. So
yeah, I agree.
rest
100%.
for success, as they say. Yeah. All right, Mr. Serber, take us out of here.
Yeah, well, there you see Be Kind coming to the fore again, because here I am trying to make fun of Brody, and yet Cindy just continues to crush it with kindness. So
we're kind of in cahoots. The elder statesman here.
I love it.
Yeah.
well, we can't thank you enough, Cindy, and Brody. We thank you as well for everything that you're doing. And Cindy, thank you so much for your time tonight. Like Brody said, just everything's amazing, wonderful advice. And I just think so much for those who want to get in the industry, who are in the industry and just want to get better. So many great things that they can use as we all try and make ourselves better broadcasters every single day.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate the time, and this format is fantastic.
Thank you so much, Cindy, Brody. Thank you. And thank you to everybody for tuning in. Until next time on BS on Broadcasting.